in an editorial they wrote, the most important election in the world this year is no election at all. It's a coronation. That's essentially what's happening. What's the significance of the coronation of President Xi?
Well, it cements his position, David, as a strongman, as the most powerful leader in China perhaps since Mao Zedong, or at least since Deng Xiaoping. Someone who will work his will without a whole lot of factional dissent within the CCP, within the Chinese Communist Party. This is someone who's determined to leave his mark on history, and he has prioritized above economic growth these strategic goals, which include intimidating Taiwan, which is de facto an independent, free nation that is a democracy.
And now you have this axis between China and Russia like you've never seen before. I mean, one has to think back to World War II when Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany got together and had that same kind of axis. Is this as strong an axis as that one, or is it weaker?
Oh, I'd say it's stronger. I mean, the union of Japan, the political sort of quasi-union of Japan and Nazi Germany there was no synergy, not that that word existed at the time. If you look at the partnership of China and Russia, which is very scary, if you look at the key innovation of the second half of the Cold War, the Nixon opening to China, it was separating the Soviet Union and China and dividing what was previously seen as this unitary communist world. The fact that we may now be in a situation where China and Russia undermine U.S. dominance of global finance, that cooperate, that you pipe Russian gas instead of exporting it to Europe, it just makes its way to China. That means that China's energy supply becomes a lot more secure in a conflict. Currently, it has to come through the Malacca Strait off of Singapore, which would be easy for the U.S. Navy to disrupt. So a lot of downside in this condominium of Eurasian power.
But obviously, China is the biggest economic threat. It's such a huge country in terms of population and, of course, in terms of its economic relations with the rest of the world. Is that going to change over the next couple of years? Are we going to see these disengagements from China by Western companies?
I think the answer is maybe. You know, the Biden administration has done some good. They haven't done away with Trump-era tariffs or export controls, and they just extended some of the export controls on semiconductors, as you mentioned. However, they gave waivers to the biggest semiconductor manufacturers in the world, TSMC in Taiwan, SK and Samsung in South Korea. And the type of strategic disengagement that people like Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative in the previous administration, talk about, that's not really policy. And that's sort of one gripe I have with this national security strategy. You can read through it a couple of times and still not come away with a coherent idea or a coherent strategy of how we are going to oppose China.
Now, China does have some weaknesses. They have weaknesses with their economy, obviously, with uprisings in China itself. Of course, they can put those down pretty easily. But for example, the average age in China is going way up. They're losing a lot of the younger people that you need to keep the economy going. What are some of the weaknesses, and how might they play into all of this?
Well, that's a very good point, David. Partly because of their one-child policy, which has been abandoned, but which resulted in an excess of males and small families and a demographic crunch that's coming. China is no longer the most populous nation on earth. That is now India, depending on whose statistics you believe. Growth is down. Xi Jinping says he wants to dramatically increase per capita income within a decade. It's very hard to see that happening. The real estate crunch that they are in potentially looks like the one that the United States went through in 2008, looked like child's play. And this is where we might get a lucky break, because they have a communist system, because rather than allocating capital based on principled self-interest of individual investors, instead they have bureaucrats allocating capital in a warped system, and they have a tremendous real estate bubble. And other signs of slowing. They have Xi Jinping committed once again to a zero COVID strategy that has really waylaid their economy and put a permanent, or at least a very long-term cloud over their recovery. So we might be at the point finally where China's economic growth model of stealing our manufacturing and intellectual property is just not bearing the fruit it once did.
And finally, we got to do this quickly. Some of my libertarian friends say, hey, look, the inherent weakness of the socialist model that they're following in China will lead to their self-destruction, so we shouldn't worry as much about it. Is there any truth to that?
No, this is the funny part where libertarians and neoconservatives sort of act like Marxists, and they believe in historical inevitability. People have to make changes. And so if we continue to export all of our manufacturing, including in critical things like pharmaceuticals, to China, they're going to perpetuate that system. People have to cause problems for the Chinese Communist Party.
Very good point. Christian Whiton, great to see you. Thank you.